to school for creative writing, and in a workshop once we learned that stories are all made up of connections and disconnections, that you can't have a narrative that only is made up of one or the other, that you can have pulling apart, but things always need to come back together again. And I think this is true in life, not just in stories. So what I'm talking about today is the story of how I came apart and back together again. So to set the stage, it was the summer of 2012. I had just come back from a writing program in Rome where I'd been working on my first novel. And everything was great. I was thrilled to have been in Italy, to be writing, to be married, to have a wonderful dog. Everything seemed like my life was kind of really finally starting. And then a few weeks after returning home, I found out that I had cancer. I had breast cancer. And it wasn't my first kind of close encounter with this disease. My husband, Matt, 3 years earlier had had lymphoma, so I had seen the disease up close, and I knew what it meant. It meant that I was going to have several months of doctor's appointments, surgeries, medications, and just general not fun stuff in my future. It meant that I had to kind of back off my commitments in order to make room for this. So it meant hold off on the novel, turn down some jobs, kind of extricate myself from this complicated but wonderful life that I had built. I made call after call, wrote email after email, kind of tearing down everything that I had worked so hard for. The thing about cancer is that it's extremely isolating. Loneliness could practically be listed as an official side effect of chemo. And this is important because studies have found that cancer patients who have strong social communities have a 25% reduced risk of mortality compared with those who don't have strong social support. I knew this was super important, and I felt really strongly about it. So 2 days before my bilateral mastectomy, I decided to throw a party. I went to a bar, invited all my friends, and I promised myself I would not lose them, that we would stay connected. And we had a great night. But then I had the surgery, and the recovery wound up being a darker period than I had anticipated. I was really weak. I couldn't get in and out of bed by myself. I had strange tubes coming out of my side. I had these weird space-aged plastic implants. It was really difficult. And I was really embarrassed by all of this. This seemed really strange, but I found it very embarrassing, and I didn't want anyone to see me that way. So I didn't wind up with a lot of visitors, and I surprised myself by not really wanting any. 2 days after the surgery, I went to my doctor to have the bandages all removed for the first time and to see the results. He stood me in front of a mirror and removed the dressings. And the weird thing about this is that I don't remember this at all. I can remember watching from the other side of the room. I can see my back, I can see my husband, I can see my surgeon, but I don't know what I actually saw in the mirror. And this was really disturbing to me. I continued kind of going to doctor's appointments. The next few weeks were a continued flurry of just running around like crazy, and everything was just a blur. The things that kind of were swirling around in my head all day, should I do chemo, should I not do chemo, which drug, didn't really seem like great topics for conversation, so I just kept really quiet about them and didn't share these things that were going on in my life. I did eventually get on the schedule to start chemo, and I decided to reflect on the previous 8 weeks. And when I did, I realized I didn't have a clear picture of what had gone on. And I think for a lot of people, they would think, great, it's better to forget. But I didn't feel that way. I wanted to be able to one day look back on this time and understand everything that had gone on. I wanted evidence, and I wanted a witness. So the day I started chemo, I asked my husband to take my photo. Then the next week after my second dose, I set up a tripod, stood in the same spot, and took my own picture. And I did this every week. I didn't really have any plans for what I was going to do with the pictures. I didn't even really know why I was doing it. I just felt compelled. Every week, I set up the tripod, set the timer, took a series of photos. I checked to make sure they were in focus, and then I put it away. At the end of chemo, after 12 weeks, I decided to keep going. I did 5 weeks of radiation. I lost some of the use of my left arm, so I did dozens of hours of physical therapy. I had 4 additional surgeries because of complications from reconstruction. But through all of this, I kept taking pictures. I lost a lot in that year. I lost a lot to cancer. Physically, I lost my breast, I lost my hair, I lost people, I lost friends who stopped calling, I lost parts of myself. But through all of it, I kept taking pictures. And at the end of the year, I realized that what I had was what I had made. Scrolling through these images on my computer, the entire year, the entire process, my entire experience took shape before me in a way that I had never been able to see it before. So, about a year after, on the 1-year anniversary of when I started chemo, I stitched the photos together into a time-lapse video, which you'll see here. So I posted that on YouTube and I went to bed. And I thought, it'd be really cool if a couple other cancer patients saw it and maybe we could talk and connect that way. When I woke up the next morning, it had over 2,000 views. And by the end of the third day, it had over 100,000. And it was popping up on some different news sites around the internet as well. I was completely freaked out. I laid in bed that night and I just wondered, what had I done? The internet can be a seriously mean place, and I had opened myself up completely in a way that I hadn't been able to do with my closest friends and family. I considered taking the video down, but the responses that were trickling in were overwhelmingly positive. There were these messages of support, of love, and of gratitude, most of which were from people I had never met. The following couple weeks were really hectic and crazy. I was doing interviews left and right, going on TV, going newspaper, kind of squeezing in all this stuff, meeting with all these people, talking about these personal details with strangers. It was oddly very similar to the early days of my diagnosis, with one major, major difference. That instead of becoming more and more isolated, I was making more and more connections. What I didn't realize when I was doing this project was that every time I set up the tripod, every time I snapped a picture, it was like reaching a hand out for someone to take. It was my way, it was a manifestation of the isolation that I felt and my desire and my need for connection. So I'm not unique in this. We all have things that we keep quiet about. Right? We have scary things, sad things, embarrassing things that we don't share with anyone else. What I realized is the problem with that is that when we keep quiet, Our silence can be like a shadow that just ever so slightly interrupts our connection to others and to ourselves. And what I realized is that a creative project can shine a light in those dark places. That a creative project, whether it be a poem or a song or a painting, can take on a life of its own and share a message that maybe you didn't feel quite brave enough to say out loud. And that there is catharsis in that in sharing that story, and there's healing in sharing that story, and there's connection. Thank you very much.